Why do women say they want one thing, but fall obsessively for the opposite? The answer isn't in what they tell you. It's buried in the unconscious, and you'll have it by the end of this video. From the moment you're old enough to understand the word love, you're handed a script. Be kind. Be yourself. Treat her with respect. Give her the world and she'll give you her heart. It's a beautiful story. Polished, marketable, and tragically false. Because behind the fairy tales of romance, behind every dating coach cliche, behind every smiling celebrity couple selling the dream of emotional transparency, lurks a truth so disturbing it had to be buried for over a century. It's not that women are lying, it's that they don't consciously know what drives them. And that's the most terrifying part. Society never meant to deceive men, but it needed to civilize them. A man who understands the female unconscious is dangerous because he cannot be controlled. So they clipped your instincts, numbed your intuition, trained you to ignore the signs that something was off. And they replaced raw masculine intelligence with behavioral scripts. Take her out, compliment her, show up on time, be emotionally available, and when she leaves, blame yourself. Or worse, double down on the script. But what if you were never meant to follow it? What if that script was designed to fail? Because the real truth, the one Sigmund Freud discovered over a century ago, was so volatile it was buried in private notes, whispered in closed-door lectures, and eventually erased by the very discipline he founded. Freud saw what most men still can't. That female desire isn't governed by logic. It's not even governed by love. It's governed by polarity. In 1897, Freud took on a peculiar case. A woman known in his journals only as the Wolf Girl. She was stunning, educated, elegant, a magnet for male attention. Yet every man who entered her orbit eventually left confused, emotionally broken, or utterly obsessed. She would seduce, then withdraw. Promise love, then disappear. Reward, then punish. To her suitors, it was madness. To Freud, it was a pattern. He traced her behavior back to a childhood scene she had buried, witnessing her mother systematically emasculate her father. Not through violence, but through silence, through manipulation, through cold surgical disrespect. That was the moment it began. The unconscious imprint. Power is never given, it is taken. And women learn early, consciously or not, how to take it. But how? Not with force, not with logic, with psychological leverage, by activating the most primal parts of the male psyche and withdrawing just before satisfaction. Freud called it desire displacement. We now know it as push-pull, reward-punishment, the addiction loop. Freud's most radical insight came not from what women said, but from how they responded. He observed that the women least satisfied with their ideal partners, men who were stable, kind, predictable, were often the same women who became emotionally dependent on men who brought chaos, tension, and unpredictability. Why? Because the unconscious doesn't crave safety, it craves polarity, the friction between opposites, masculine and feminine, order and chaos, security and danger. It's this tension, not consistency, that fuels her arousal, her fixation, her obsession. The man who gives too much, predictable. The man who gives nothing, dismissed. But the man who knows how to oscillate between warmth and distance, he becomes unforgettable. Not because he's manipulative, because he's aligned with her psychological architecture. Decades after Freud's death, his forbidden theories are being quietly validated. A 2012 study from the University of Texas found that women are 52% more likely to engage with men who display controlled unpredictability. Another study from the Journal of Social Psychology showed that women consistently rated men as more attractive when they believed other women desired them, even if the man was objectively average in looks and status. Why? Because female attraction is contextual. It's a calculation, mostly unconscious, of status, narrative, and polarity. Men think attraction is about merit, but for women, attraction is about story. Not what you say, not what you offer, but how you make her feel within the structure of a subconscious drama. You see it every day. Men bending over backward, texting first, planning the dates, being emotionally available, treating her like a goddess while watching her leave for someone who barely acknowledges her. It's not that she hates you, it's that you're playing checkers while her unconscious is playing 4D chess. She's not consciously choosing chaos, but her nervous system is. She's not seeking cruelty, but she's responding to the tension. This is the game Freud tried to warn us about. Not to degrade women, but to decode them. Because he knew something no modern dating guru seems to understand. What a woman wants and what a woman responds to are often exact opposites. Freud's findings were met with outrage, not because they were wrong, but because they were dangerous. If men knew how to tap into polarity, unpredictability, and emotional contrast, the balance of power would shift. Women wouldn't be less free, but men would no longer be blind. So his most revealing lectures were never published. His most controversial notes were suppressed. The term psychosexual became taboo, and society doubled down on the lie. The nice guy myth, the fairy tale, the beta script that numbs your instincts and sterilizes your impact. Because desire lives in the unconscious, and the unconscious isn't swayed by what's logical, nice, or emotionally safe. It's pulled toward contrast, toward tension, toward polarity. Women fall for the opposite of what they say because what they say comes from the mind, and what they respond to comes from the shadow. And that shadow is older than morality, older than culture, and older than language itself. Why do women chase the men who resist them and destroy the ones who obey? By the end of this episode, you'll understand the ancient psychological mechanism behind this paradox and why obedience never triggers desire. Most men think that love is a reward for good behavior. Be loyal, be available, be consistent, and eventually, she'll choose you. It's what we're taught in childhood stories, schoolyard advice, and modern therapy. Obey the emotional rules and you'll be safe, loved, desired. But if that were true, why do so many women walk away from the men who give them everything? Why do they abandon safety for danger, devotion for indifference, and predictability for chaos? To understand this, we have to descend into the underworld of female psychology, a domain Freud called the shadow circuit. You've seen him. Maybe you've been him. He listens. He remembers birthdays. He plans the perfect dates. He's emotionally open. He validates her feelings. And slowly, she pulls away. Not because he changed, but because something inside her shifted. She begins to test him, withdraw, argue. She gets cold. She flirts with others. She says she needs space, and he's confused, angry, hurt. But if he knew what Freud discovered in 1901, he would have seen it coming. Because Freud didn't just study dreams or trauma, he studied attraction patterns, especially in women who destroyed the very relationships they once begged for. In one of his most infamous cases, Freud was brought in to counsel a Viennese countess. She was aristocracy, wealth, class, social power, and she had thrown it all away for an illiterate stable boy. The man couldn't read, couldn't dress, couldn't navigate a ballroom, but she gave him everything. Her family was horrified. Her friends called it madness. Her husband, kind, wealthy, devoted, was shattered. Why would a woman abandon everything for a man who offered nothing? Freud's answer was chilling. The stable boy didn't chase her. He didn't need her. He was emotionally unavailable. And that triggered a response in her unconscious, so powerful it overrode logic, morality, and self-preservation. Here's the core of Freud's shadow circuit theory. What a woman says she wants is filtered through her conscious mind. What she responds to is dictated by her unconscious drives. And those drives evolved in environments of chaos, danger, and survival. In that environment, emotional unpredictability wasn't a red flag. It was a signal of power, of genetic superiority, of dominance. Women don't want emotional violence, but their nervous systems are hardwired to detect hierarchy, and hierarchy is established through resistance, not obedience. The stable boy gave her nothing, and that made her crave everything, because craving isn't born from abundance. It's born from denial. Let's be clear, This isn't about being cold, abusive, or cruel. It's about controlled emotional contrast. Modern research supports this. A 2017 study in evolutionary psychology found that women are significantly more attracted to men who show selective emotional availability, warm in one moment, distant in another. This isn't a game. It's a biological switch. Too much warmth, and she feels secure, but bored. Too much distance, and she detaches. But the man who controls the rhythm of presence and absence, who gives just enough, unpredictably, becomes addictive. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about being hard to control. Most men are taught that loyalty is the foundation of love. And it is for men. But for women, loyalty after attraction reinforces connection. It does not create it. The obedient man fails not because he's bad, but because he's predictable. She knows what he'll say, what he'll do, how he'll react. And the human brain devalues the known. It prizes novelty, challenge, tension. That's why she pushes buttons, withdraws, picks fights, not consciously to hurt, but to test. She's not seeking comfort. She's seeking confirmation that you are unshakable. And if you break under pressure, she cannot trust you or desire you because her unconscious just labeled you as weak. From an evolutionary standpoint, resistance is a signal of high value. It suggests you have options, purpose, direction. It suggests you won't abandon your mission for validation. That's attractive, not because it's cruel, but because it mirrors strength. Freud wrote, "The female unconscious does not seek the submissive man, it seeks the sovereign." Modern neuroscience affirms this. Functional MRI scans show that the female brain responds with greater arousal to unpredictable romantic stimuli than to consistent loving ones. The effect is chemical, not personal, not moral. When she senses that you are the storm, not a raft in her ocean, her nervous system lights up. Cleopatra, Helen of Troy, Mata Hari, Marilyn Monroe. History's most desired women were drawn to men who resisted control, not because they hated love, but because love without conquest feels empty. Freud noted, "Women desire the man they cannot possess, not because they want to suffer, but because suffering validates the value of the prize." If you fold, if you collapse into her orbit, if your center is determined by her moods, you become digestible. And digestible men are forgotten. Today's man is trained to perform worthiness. He curates his profile, memorizes lines, studies attachment styles. He self-regulates, self-soothes, and never raises his voice. And still, she loses interest. Why? Because he's available, too available. And availability without polarity is invisible. He thinks he's doing everything right, but her unconscious only responds to difference. The fire and the freeze, the chaos and the calm. And here is the answer of, why do women chase the men who resist them? Because in the unconscious mind, resistance equals power. The man who obeys offers certainty. The man who resists offers possibility, the intoxicating sense that she has to earn his presence. And in that tension, she feels alive. The shadow circuit isn't about cruelty, it's about contrast. Not being distant, but being rooted in your center. Not playing games, but playing your game. And the man who owns his rhythm, who stays in his gravity, becomes the man she cannot predict, and therefore cannot stop thinking about. Can you make someone fall so deeply in love, they physically crave you? By the end of this episode, you'll know how the mind turns desire into obsession and how to control the rhythm that rewires her nervous system. We've all seen it. The woman who swore she was done with him, blocked his number, moved on, and then a text arrives. One word, no apology, no promise, and she's back. Tangled, emotional, obsessing. Why? Because what you're watching isn't romance. It's addiction. And what Freud uncovered long before modern neuroscience caught up is that love can be engineered. Not by pretending, not by manipulation, but by activating the exact psychological mechanics that cause the human brain to become chemically dependent on another person. He called it the addiction protocol. In 1905, Freud documented a case that would become legendary in his private notes. A world-renowned soprano. She was elegant, powerful, adored by audiences across Europe. And she left everything, her fame, her fortune, her family, for a man who could barely support himself. A poet, not rich, not influential, not traditionally attractive. But he had one trait no other man had shown her: emotional rhythm. He would disappear for days, reappear with a line of verse, stare into her soul, then vanish into silence. She tried to leave him, repeatedly, but her own words betrayed her. When he's near, I feel more alive than I ever have. When he's gone, I feel hollow, like my skin is too thin. Freud's diagnosis? Intermittent reinforcement, the same neurological pattern that drives gambling addiction. The same reason millions of people stay in toxic relationships long after the love has died. At its core, the human brain is a reward system. When we get what we expect consistently, we feel stable, but not excited. But when rewards are inconsistent, unpredictable, dopamine floods the system. This is how slot machines work. You don't win every time. You almost win, randomly, just enough to keep pulling the lever. That maybe becomes a hook. And this is exactly how the addiction protocol functions. Not in money, in emotion. Too much affection equals boredom. Too little equals disinterest. But affection in unpredictable bursts, that lights up the brain like a drug. Modern neuroscience proves this. A 2014 study at Harvard found that the brain's reward circuitry becomes more activated by unpredictable pleasure than by consistent pleasure. This is why love isn't lost to cruelty, it's lost to monotony. You don't need to be cold or manipulative to activate this protocol. You need to create a pattern of uncertainty that causes emotional anticipation. This is not about neglect, it's about rhythm. Be warm, be present, then step back. Let her feel the absence, not as punishment, but as contrast. Then return, with full presence, with fire. Then fade again. It's this push and pull, not the content of your words or the weight of your promises, that causes her nervous system to sync with yours. Once that synchronization begins, she can't stop thinking about you because her body is now in the loop. Freud discovered something even more disturbing. It wasn't the love that women remembered, it was the contrast. The men who left the deepest marks weren't the ones who said, "I love you" every day. They were the ones who took her from laughter to heartbreak to passion to silence in a single evening. Not violently, not abusively, but intensely. They created emotional spikes, and those spikes hardwired themselves into the woman's long-term memory. A 2011 study on episodic memory showed that emotionally charged events are remembered more vividly and last longer in the brain than emotionally neutral ones. And the more intense the shift in emotion, the more lasting the imprint. This explains why the man who texts back every time, says all the right things, and is always available becomes forgettable, while the man who creates emotional range becomes unforgettable. Freud wasn't the only one who saw this. History's greatest seducers instinctively knew presence is only powerful when paired with absence. Giacomo Casanova would vanish for weeks, then send a letter that unraveled a woman's entire psyche. Napoleon's love letters to Josephine weren't constant flattery. They were explosions of fire and silence, interspersed with absence so painful it made her addicted to his presence. Even modern attachment science confirms unpredictability in the early stages of courtship increases levels of obsession and recall. So if you want to be remembered, stop being constant, start being rhythmic. You already see this play out. The man who always texts back instantly, forgotten. The man who responds unpredictably in different tones at different times, remembered. The guy who plans every date perfectly, safe. The one who takes her on a midnight drive to nowhere, then leaves her in suspense for days, burned into memory. It's not cruelty, it's emotional chemistry. And most men will never learn it because they're too afraid to break the script, too afraid to let her feel lack. But desire is born in the gap between certainty and chaos. How to apply the addiction protocol without manipulation. There's a way to do this with integrity. Stop over-explaining yourself. Silence isn't weakness, it's space. Let her fill it. Interrupt predictable patterns. If she knows you'll call every night, don't. Skip a day. Let her wonder. Create unforgettable moments. Don't just date or text. Craft memories with contrast. A deep conversation followed by a mysterious silence. An intimate kiss followed by playful distance. Let her chase occasionally. You don't always have to reach out. Give her room to feel the pullback. Her pursuit increases her investment. Be comfortable with distance. If you panic when she pulls away, you lose rhythm. Trust the space. Trust the protocol. Answer to the question of, can you make someone physically crave you? Yes. Not with words, not with gifts, not with devotion, but by controlling the emotional rhythm that stimulates her dopamine system like a drug. When you master the balance of warmth and withdrawal, presence and absence, you activate her deepest psychological circuitry. You don't become her choice, you become her chemical pattern. And once that happens, she's no longer choosing to want you. Her body is. And that's not love. That's obsession. This was never about seduction. It was about sovereignty. Understanding how attraction, obsession, and devotion actually work. Not the lies sold in books and talk shows, but the truths whispered by Freud, written in blood and memory, and buried for over a century. You now hold the key. The only question is, what will you do with it? If you're ready to go even deeper into dark psychology, primal dynamics, and the forbidden blueprints of influence, they tried to bury this knowledge, but you just unlocked it.